But all that said, you've done you've taken incredible personal risks and professional risks and made principled stances. However, I think that I detect a kind of cynicism in some of the positions that you take sometimes, and I imagine it's just the sort of cynicism that inevitably gets baked in after years and years of working with bureaucracy. I mean, it's not the people, it's the system that sort of burns out whatever that it just snuffs out whatever light of hope that is in you slowly. But here's where I hear the cynicism in two places. One, you say, well, what president wants to get up and make that sort of announcement that, I know my job is to protect you, but here are these things in the atmosphere. We don't know where they're from and what they can do, and they're more advanced. No president wants to do that. But we shouldn't just forget to mention that the president's job isn't to do the things that he wants to do. Right? There are
I'm
uh,
not saying that.
no, I know you're not. But I think that you aren't going to be the one to interject it because you just know that the reality of the situation is such that that's how these offices actually work. And so I want to say as a citizen that the president's job isn't to just do what he wants. That his job has principled obligations that he has to fulfill toward the public, and in a lot of cases, that's going and not a lot maybe, but in some very important cases, it's gonna require the president to come out and say something that may tank his career and create a bunch of problems for him professionally. You seem to have made a kind of decision like that yourself. Are we too I don't is it too cynical of us to that we're not expecting that?
No, I mean, I think that this is a matter of weighing competing interests. You've got tens of millions of children who might be terrified, tens of millions of adults and people who are feel vulnerable who might be terrified. And you represent those people. And there are times when leaders have to make really tough decisions about trade-offs. They don't want to lie, they don't want to deceive. They also don't want to terrify, 100 million American children and send them to bed having nightmares about, spiders coming out of the sky and eating their parents or something. So these are just practical considerations. And, there are principles here, but what are those principles? I mean, we have long ago, as a people, agreed that the government can and should keep secrets
Sure,
on our
absolutely.
for us, and our legislators have passed legislation concurring in that and laying around guidelines for that because they realize that we can't defend ourselves effectively in a Darwinian world if we're not able to do that. So I think we have to be nuanced and we have to understand. I wish everybody in this debate could sort of get off a podium and just look at the facts and stick to the facts and try to approach it more pragmatically and dispassionately.
I
There are a
think
lot
that's
of
what the
people
public
that,
wants to do, isn't it? But we don't have the facts to maybe we wouldn't be very good at it, but we don't at least have the first step of, like, the access to the facts that would help us to make a sort of practical decision about what to believe or what to do.
I agree that's very hard, and the government is largely responsible for that itself because it has violated the public's trust on many occasions. Um, in this instance,
Specifically with respect to this topic, I mean, historically,
yeah,
there's no question that the government has
yeah,
engaged in complex disinformation campaigns and intended to make the subject seem,
that's
uh,
right.
silly.
We had the Air Force saying originally they had a crashed spaceship at Roswell, and they said no, it wasn't. Then they changed their story again. It was actually a classified program that we didn't tell you about. We have all kinds of shenanigans. We have Colonel Doty or Rick Doty, I don't think he was a colonel actually, from OSI saying that he was paying a MUFON person under the table to spy on other UFO researchers, which is, to my best of my knowledge, grossly illegal
Hmm.
and inappropriate. So yeah, there are shenanigans, I understand why people are confused and why people are skeptical, but um, the best way to proceed, it seems to me, is for everyone to try to be as faithful as we can to the facts and not leap to the conclusion that, well, because uh, this or that person said something, that necessarily the government's got a secret space fleet and there's a galactic council and reptilians on the council are making these decisions and telling the president what to do, or people extrapolate wildly, and it happens on both sides. There are people that who are attacking some of us because they think we're trying to roll the curtain back on science or promote paranormal sort of methodologies or something like that. I wish people could, really try to stick more to the facts and reason from the facts and approach this as like, yeah, this is a real thing. We're in this together. Let's try to figure it out.
I wish that too, but the government has created such a vacuum of facts, and that vacuum gets filled with speculation. And you can't control it. When it's a vacuum, you have
Uh,
so little control over what lines
and
of
I think
speculation grow in there.
and I think what's exacerbating it right now, which is a totally self-inflicted wound. It's true that the government could not just make everything that it has public without compromising some very important capabilities that warfighters depend on. But they certainly do not have an excuse from withholding that data from Congress, from the oversight committees. And as we know, there's a great deal of dissatisfaction on the Hill. There's a great deal of feeling by our representatives who are cleared for these things and are serving on committees that have oversight responsibilities. And they're saying they're not satisfied with what they're getting. My advice to Arrow is take all the most interesting anomalous cases you have out of that 1,500. They're not interested in the 400 that you found out were balloons. I mean, that's great. You need to do that, but
We would expect you to find
I,
lots of
I
them.
yeah, we would expect you to find lots of stuff. That's not the interesting stuff, right? What they want to know is what are you seeing that could represent a strategic breakthrough by a potential adversary, or could be a probe from another planet. They want to know, is there something going on that's really anomalous, that really defies our present understanding of science and that sort of thing? Cull those 1,500 reports, take the ones that are the most difficult to explain, the most extraordinary, and brief them on those. And I've tried to suggest to some people on the Hill that they might create some language that sort of helps to push that and maybe requires a briefing or articulates that desire to get that sort of information. And they also need to make sure Arrow's getting the information. There's a real question as to what is being shared with Arrow.
Hmm.
And the real question in my mind, at least, I'm not convinced that I know from the outset the Air Force was extremely resistant. I know they were resistant to the UAP task force. I know they were resistant to initially to the Congressional request for information. When they came out with a report, the first report in 2021, which was something that I had advocated for 2 years, and finally the Intelligence Committee did pick that up, that recommendation, and go with it. But when they came out with that report, they said, okay, we've identified 144 incidents report since 2004. None of those, maybe a handful, were from the Air Force. The Air Force said, well, we don't collect data on that. We don't have anything.
Yeah, they've been totally
We
uncooperative.
have nothing. And they're responsible for aerospace defense. They know that there's thousands of uncorrelated tracks every year. They launch fighters and scramble them from strip alert to try to intercept these things. We know
Uncorrelated
from
radar tracks, you mean we don't correlate them to something that we already see in, like, the FAA's flight database or something?
right. So we see something that doesn't have a transponder, it's approaching the United States at a high speed and doesn't answer the phone when somebody tries to get them on the radio, and maybe they're heading towards a very sensitive area, then we say we need to check that out. And we know that there have been cases. I interviewed a NORAD colonel, retired, who was at Cheyenne Mountain one time when a object at high speed started coming down from the Arctic. And the commander of NORAD said, I want that thing. The four-star said, get that thing. They were launching everything they had in strip alert in the East Coast. They couldn't get a radar lock on it. They couldn't catch it. And yet the Air Force says we don't have any information about anything, anything unidentified. So there's a disconnect. And of course, people are scratching their heads a little bit. How can that be? When you've got the most powerful radars in the world, the most powerful space surveillance capabilities in the world, you're parsing, untold numbers of gigabits of data every hour, monitoring all these areas, and you don't have any anomalies. You don't have see anything that is curious or doesn't fit the bill for a conventional aircraft or whatever.
I mean, even private corporations have incredible surveillance capabilities. I did some side consulting work for a company that takes these incredibly high definition aerial photos of entire cities, like one every second. You can almost read a newspaper from, you know, all the way up, so that they can do things like track a robber after he's, robbed a bank to see where he came from in the first place. Like that level of civilian capability has to only be a small fraction of the power and scale of the governments, and to say that to deny any information on something coming down from the Arctic, seems just preposterous to me. So
Yeah, it's kind of, makes you wonder, well, does it go into a special compartment, or is it, there's so much stigma that they just let it fall on the floor and nobody follows up, which would be irresponsible in itself. How do you know it's coming across the Arctic? Well, the other side over there is Russia. And, is it coming from Russia? Is it a Russian platform? I mean, this is not stuff that you would think you would ignore. Uh, Intrusions on ICBM bases and facilities, interference with nuclear command and control. That's not the kind of thing that typically, you would ignore. It's quite the opposite, right?
yeah, absolutely.
So, so it is understandable that people have a lot of questions and a lot of skepticism, and it is largely the government's fault. I think the best first step to correcting that is to be really candid, as candid as possible with the public and with Congress. And with Congress, they can really get into a lot of the nitty gritty and the details at a classified level.